For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vishwas Satka. I am a principal investigator for this new knowledge project at BITS University. At the heart of the Emancipatory Futures project is the idea that the subaltern, or if you like, the wretched of the earth, or the popular, or the peasant, or the working class subject of history can think, can act, can construct futures, can anticipate futures, and can imagine these futures. We have various research thrusts within this knowledge project, ranging from grand ecocentric futures, explorations of utopia, dystopia, decolonized futures, climate temporalities and rethinking futures, and thrusts around thinking about futures from the standpoint of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary knowledge. We've been thinking together with Dr. Sumangala Damodaran for the past 2 days. She's been leading a seminar on music and the radical impulse, and that has been a wonderful and enriching experience for all of us who participated in this conversation. Today, Dr. Damodaran is going to give us a public lecture on music, politics, and resistance in contemporary India. For those who have joined us, this is her short bio. Dr. Damodaran is a professor of economics, development studies, and popular music studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Apart from her academic involvements as an economist and social scientist, she's also a singer and composer. Her archiving and documentation of the musical tradition of the Indian People's Theatre Association from the 1940s and 1950s has resulted in a book titled The Radical Impulse, Music in the Tradition of IPTA, and an album titled Songs of Protest. And she has performed from the documented repertoire extensively in different parts of the country and abroad. She has also collaborated with poets and musicians from South Africa around a project titled Insurrections, which has resulted in 4 albums. Sumangala is currently engaged in researching the relationship between music and migration, particularly of women in slavery and servitude across centuries and across vast tracts of the globe that were linked through long-distance trade in commodities and symbolic goods. This work is being done in collaboration with several universities in Africa and Asia. Tonight, Dr. Damodaran is going to, as I say, bring this interpretive framework, the rich conceptual approach that she has to music to locate contemporary resistance in India. The farmers' struggles in India has been one of the biggest in the world. The crackdown on Muslim minorities has also drawn attention and has spawned an amazing fluorescence of radical music and the radical impulse. With that, over to Dr. Damodaran.
Thanks, Vish. I'm delighted to be here, and once again, thank you to the Emancipatory Future Studies project for asking me to speak about music, politics, and the relationship between music, society, politics, and knowledge creation. So I'm going to speak about, the title is Understanding the Expressions of Music, Politics, and Resistance in Contemporary South Asia, with a focus on India. I'm going to be speaking mostly about India, but I'll also make references to some other parts of South Asia. Now, before I start speaking, I want to show a video and also some photographs. These are from an exhibition that I was part of. It was a sound installation which was created by me, curated by me, and in collaboration with a designer, Sudhanva Deshpande, and Shaz Ahmed, a graphic animation artist, who we got together for a project called People's Music, and where we tried to present the history of people's music in South Asia over a period of 80 years. It was a very ambitious project. Of course, the point was not to try and be representative and, enumerate, but to be able to tease out the nuances of the variety that is available, that has been there, in the repertoire of what is called people's music. So what I'll do is to first play a 6-minute animation film, which was created using a combination of archival footage, archival recordings from the late colonial period. We also used styles that artists and painters were using from the 1940s onwards to actually depict the conditions of ordinary people in India. And so this was done for a particular festival in Goa a few years ago. So let me start with the video. Can you see?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
Is the video visible?
The video is not visible.
Yeah. Is it?
We can't see the video, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just try again. I don't know what's happened.
Sharing screen.
Yeah, no, I stopped share. Let me just try it again. Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
She is.
Netflix.
Oh dear, I'm sorry. Sorry, if somebody could help me with this. Yeah.
Okay. So I think if you just share your screen, go to desktop one. Yeah, there.
Yeah.
Second one, yeah. And then just double click on it.
Mm-hmm.
One is so
Okay.
good.
Yeah, but
Now go back down to Finder. It's not showing up. Let's see if we can just bring this down. Yeah, just to minimize that. Minimize it. Okay. Because I can see it there at the bottom. Yeah. And
then I play this.
yeah. Because last time it wasn't moving. Can you see that?
Can you see something that's opened up?
Yeah, we see the folder like
Okay.
this.
No.
We don't see any moving.
You see that?
No.
Okay,
No.
All right. Okay, maybe I'll try and play this at the end. Yeah. I think let's just start.
okay.
Yeah. I'm going to start with the story of a particular song. It's a song called Hum Dekhenge. Yeah, let me stop sharing. Am I audible now? I'm sorry about the glitch.
You're perfectly audible.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so Faiz Ahmed Faiz, a renowned Pakistani poet, wrote a poem called Hum Dekhenge, We Shall See, in 1979, 2 years after a military coup in Pakistan by General Zia-ul Haq, after a military coup happened in Pakistan by General Zia-ul Haq. Under this regime, Pakistan's democracy was flailing, and he submitted it to an Islamic state laden with religious Islamic symbolism. The poem utilized Islamic imagery and subverted images in referring to a day of reckoning when the people would win and citadels would crumble. Iqbal Bano, a singer, converted the poem into a song, wearing a sari in defiance to a ban of the sari because it was considered Hindu and therefore from India. It was banned by Zia's military regime in 1986, and so Iqbal Bano sang the song in defiance, wearing a sari. On the occasion, she sang many Faiz poems, but the loudest cheers were reserved for Hum Dekhenge. She finished the concert, but the audience refused to let her leave and begged for an encore of Hum Dekhenge. The slogans that started spontaneously as she sang made the musicians stop and start playing to the rhythm of Inqilab Zindabad or Long Live the Revolution. Subsequently, there were raids on the houses of the organizers, and recordings that were available that people had made of the performance were taken away, except for one which somehow survived and also traveled to India surreptitiously. In February 2020, the same song, which had become popular in India by the late 1980s, was declared anti-national by a premier technology institution, the Indian Institute of Technology, because of its references to Allah, which it was argued hurt the sentiments of Hindus. So it was anti-national in both countries. This action by a state institution provoked even more singing of the song all over India. In fact, it got translated into several languages and became 20 times more popular than it was before, in defiance to an exclusionary Citizenship Amendment Act that was passed by the government that disenfranchises communities, particularly Muslims, on the basis of a problematic definition of citizenship. And there was a massive movement that built up all over India just before the pandemic, which of course was brought to an abrupt end because of the lockdown. The period from the mid-1980s or thereabouts inaugurated an era that was to throw up important cultural questions that have particularly marked the last decades in Indian history, last 3 decades in Indian history, of which the communal question and the caste question were crucial. I'm focusing on these two because over this period, particularly from the late 1980s, a large corpus of music came to be created, interpreted, and performed around these questions, challenging and at the same time shaping popular sensibilities in different languages and in different parts of the country. Ubiquitously referred to as Mandal Mandir politics, the rise of majoritarian Hindutva, or the assertion and domination of religious Hindu ideology and the idea of a Hindu nation on the one hand, and the anti-caste movements on the other, along with the waves of communal conflagrations and violence against Dalits or those who belonged to the historically deprived castes over the decades from then, saw interesting trends in literature and music. In engaging with interreligious or what are referred to as communal flare-ups, the rise of Hindu majoritarianism and the relationships between people from different religious backgrounds, interrogating the cultural foundations of secular India emerged, once again as a primary concern. Around the same time, the caste question and Dalit assertion became culturally prominent through literature and music, insisting on the need for an alternative and emancipatory aesthetic. So I'm going to talk about some different kinds of music that came up in this period, and I'm focusing on the past 2 or 3 decades. The first was the idea of the balladeer and of agitprop forms of performance, musical performance. The anxieties with the post-independence political and development trajectory were to consolidate by the late 1960s, and theater and music would start to strongly reflect the specific problems that were being experienced by the people in different parts of the country. By the time a state of internal emergency was declared in 1975, there was already a growing momentum to political music forms that were being developed. The nation and its constituents, state repression, regional assertion, economic disparities, caste and religious discrimination, communal tensions, and numerous other political concerns were to be articulated and communicated by various kinds of musicians from the mid-1970s onwards. An important figure representing oppositional music was that of the bard or the balladeer, carrying forth forms that had been experimented with from the days of the Indian People's Theatre Association in the 1940s and 50s. Gummadi Venkata Rao, or Gadar, one such musician, poet and singer from Telangana in southern India, and Sambhaji Bhagat from Maharashtra in Western India, emerged as prominent balladeers who created vast repertoires of songs on contemporary issues from the 1980s onwards, drawing on long-standing bardic traditions from both the regions. Now, they are both performers who are very close to the kind of performance poetry traditions that you see in this part of the world. Gadar, born in a Dalit family from Telangana, worked with a traditional Telugu storytelling form, which was called Burakatha, and developed it to talk about class and caste exploitation, along with several others who developed this particular version of political Burakatha. From the mid-1980s, Gadar actively worked with the Naxalite movement, forming an organization called the Jananatya Mandali, going underground and traveling extensively through forest areas in different parts of India, singing and telling stories about conditions of the people using folk forms. Combining lyrics reflecting what he refers to as a Marxist analysis of conditions in society with the use of traditional folk forms, his songs have taken forward a musical style that developed in the Telugu-speaking regions of Andhra, Telangana, and Rayalaseema from the 1940s. This tradition had seen extensive revival and representation of indigenous musical forms involving identification of various categories of marginalized people, collection of their traditional songs around life, and making them visible in rural areas as well as for urban audiences. The stated purpose of such archiving and representation had been to educate people, challenge retrograde social practices, and also artistically forge new solidarities between people who had often never interacted socially outside of caste, gender, and class structures. Thus, excavating and representing the cultural forms of those who are from the lowest castes and the poorest sections, making them prominent and performed by those who traditionally might have never have had contact with them, was an explicit purpose in these regions from the 1940s onwards, with Gadar's music and storytelling taking it forward substantially after the end of the emergency period in 1977. Narrating the difficulties due to galloping prices during the emergency, Gadar sang about how ordinary people found it difficult to eat in a song titled Yem Kone Dattu Ledu. Another song, This Village Belongs to Us, put forward a socialist vision. This village belongs to us, these streets belong to us, all work is because of us, all implements due to us. The plow is ours, the sickle is ours, the bullock is ours, the bullock cart is ours. Who is this oppressor and why is he committing his crime? So this was one of his famous songs. The figure of the balladeer had been characterized by specific modes of performance, employing styles from song speech repertoires that came from different contexts. The balladeer was not only a speaker singer, but also had to dress and move his hands and body in particular ways that came from specific traditions. Gadar had become well known for performing with his upper body bare, black shawl on his shoulder, and with a bamboo stick in his hand, speaking, singing in a declamatory and satirical exhortatory style. Another example of the ballad style of speech song being employed to talk about contemporary issues was the Lok Shahir, or the people's poet tradition from Maharashtra, which emerged as the people's version of an older poetic tradition. The Shahirs, or these poets, were medieval poet singers whose poetry has come down from several centuries before, who traveled across several regions singing ballads called povadas about heroism. So this is again very similar to the kind of praise poetry traditions that you have in Africa. So traditionally the Shahirs used to sing about heroic acts whose dramatic episodes were related through rhythmic meter, and familiar refrains would be combined with colloquial speech song. Lok Shahirs, or people's poets, who explicitly brought the idea of the people, or lok, into the Shahiri tradition. This breed of firebrand poet singers, mostly from the Mahar and Mang communities, which were Dalit communities, lent their voices to the independence movement, allied with the communists in movements for social transformation, and also later to several socio-political movements in the country. In more contemporary times, Sambhaji Bhagat, Sachin Mali, and Sheetal Sathe have emerged as very important lok shahirs who perform music around themes of caste oppression, labor and work, the state and repression. Bhagat, a Dalit singer who associated with what he refers to as Marxist Ambedkarite politics, emerged as a major lok shahir in Maharashtra in the 1980s, providing mentorship to a new generation of musicians like Sheetal Sathe and Sachin Mali in more recent times. And these are all musicians who've been performing ceaselessly over the past several years. They've been arrested several times and they come out and continue to perform. In terms of content, both Bhagat's and Sathe's songs contain scathing critiques of caste and class hierarchies in contemporary India. Look at these people carefully, brother. Recognize their faces carefully, brother. Beware of these people, brother. This is just a few lines from one song. Sings Bhagat about those in power who, according to his song, are fixers and thieves, warning people in his audience that their oppressors will not be overpowered if they do not call them out by recognizing who they are. So he sort of declares from the stage, say that, here they are, recognize your oppressors, call them out. They are thieves, they are, ruthless, and so on. So it's a very direct kind of a style, and which also came from this kind of bardic balladeer tradition. So this is one, set of musicians. Again, there's huge variety between these different singers, but then I broadly have brought it within a balladeer tradition. The second category of musicians are those who have been interpreting and going back to tradition. An important dimension of creating people's music was the engagement with old traditions. From the 1940s onwards, ranging from classical traditions to folk ones, this had meant a need to contend with various conceptualizations of nationalism, with musical expressions of nationalism involving experiments with classical and indigenous musical forms in different parts of the world that were about the people. And I talked about this in the first talk. It was about the people who constituted the nation and thus offered alternative musical interpretations of the nation. These questions of how to interpret long-standing classical traditions, as well as how to approach folk traditions in representing the people, also came up repeatedly in the post-independence period. In the aftermath of the demolition of the Babri Masjid, which was a mosque from the Mughal period in 1992, which was brought down with the active intervention of the state by members of various Hindu outfits. It happened in 1992. With communal politics and tensions at their apogee, a number of musicians and other artists began to undertake an inquiry into what kinds of music would be able to address the questions that the political situation in the country had thrown up. At the heart of the communal situation were issues of tradition, heritage, nationalism, religion, tolerance, and citizenship. In northern India, and especially in the city of Delhi, these questions had simmered for a long time, and violent politics had seen the anti-Sikh carnage of 1984, following the Operation Blue Star and the assassination of the theatre person and cultural activist Safdar Hashmi in 1989, both of which involved the ruling party at the national level. Between 1994 and 2002, a large number of communal conflagrations flared up with massive Hindu-Muslim riots taking place in Gujarat in 2002, allegedly abetted by the state machinery. From the 1990s onwards, the inquiry into questions of heritage, tolerance, and rebellion led musicians to begin studying and performing repertoires that were excavated from the past, often from centuries before. Examples that come to mind are the musicians Shubha Mudgal, Dhruv Sangari, Madan Gopal Singh, the Kabir Project, to name a few among many, who have excavated and worked through various repertoires from the past, often the distant past, with a critical view, and also many others who have revived traditional but relatively obscure repertoires from the past. A vast corpus of such music, largely from Sufi and Bhakti traditions from the 12th century onwards, which are associated with religious movements, religious reformist movements from the 12th century onwards, has come to address and reconstellate questions of nation, identity, and politics in a refreshing manner, challenging right-wing cultural assertions frontally, and also shaping popular music listening cultures in the country through providing contemporary interpretations. So one of the major developments that has happened is that for these musicians who actually excavated poetry from the past and started performing it, this also got taken up by the popular media quite significantly. So after a certain time, it became fashionable for young musicians to have the word Sufi, for all kinds of music that was being performed. So you have Sufi rock and Sufi punk and Sufi funk and, all kinds of things. But it also, gave a certain legitimacy to actually performing music that has a really old history. So underlying such excavations into the past were urgent questions. What did Indian history have to offer that would enable the cultural interrogation or interpretation of the present? More specifically, what did older poetic and musical traditions have to offer that could enable making sense of the present, or to offer an alternative to the predilections of the present? What in centuries old poetic and musical repertoires could be tapped to seize out secular principles or critiques of the caste system in order to make appeals for humanism and peace in the present? In sociologist Michael Denning's words, what were the elements of the usable past that could address the issues in the present? The repertoires that have been created and the forms that have been worked with, reproduced and interpreted, that have been worked with, reproduced and interpreted, demonstrate three objectives. First, against the background of a strident majoritarianism, as well as a defensive retreat and reaction of minority communities, the music gives a call for transcending the narrowness that competitive communalism invariably induces. Second, it brings into the politics of protest a fresh view of history and tradition going back several centuries. As part of this, questions of nation and tradition have been reinterrogated using musical and literary material from history. Third, an important objective has been a radical one: to understand and inherit older forms, to transform them for contemporaneity and for the future. Madan Gopal Singh, who has been one of the first and most prominent musicians responsible for bringing the Sufi music tradition, as well as its aesthetic and philosophical dimensions, into discussions on the contemporary, has excavated and sung the poetry of Shah Hussain, Sultan Bahu, and Bulle Shah from the 15th or 16th century onwards, as part of his search for the lineages of the contemporary. He refers to the potential for resistance in such forms as a joyous carnival of compassion and inclusion, especially in a political context characterized by the terror of the authentic. Such interventions brought back into focus the idea of the usable past in understanding the culture of India, in presenting the possibility that the singing of religious bhakti or Sufi music might not be necessarily related to a belief in God or otherwise, but could bring to light the fact that both positions were possible, belief or non-belief were possible, given the multi-layered nature of art and religion in India. These musical interventions and explorations opened up a new discourse on the relationship to tradition that did not hinge on the belief in God or adherence to ritual. In actual situations involving communal tension and the encouragement of intercommunity animosities, as well as the orchestration of attacks by political organizations, these interventions have been powerful voicings of an alternative politics, in this case, through an interrogation of tradition. This alternative musical imaginary, however small it might be in comparison to what more conservative or mainstream musical trends were, had impacted the popular realm or the public sphere through various kinds of media, performance venues, and festivals that were not merely confined to a converted or a niche audience of listeners. It was a combination of the content of the poetry, the historical information about the poets and musicians whose repertoires were being recuperated and interpreted, and what they were responding to in the times that they lived in, along with the performativity of the musicians who were performing it in the present, that was creating the popularity of these repertoires. One of the musicians, Dhruv Sangari, has been quoted to say, musically, it gives you so much license, and he's a Sufi singer. Musically, it gives you so much license, you can put in anything you like in Qawwali. It is liberating. I can put in any language, genre, style, any tune, any song. If I'm singing something and I want to thematically imagine another thing, I can do it. I have that license. But if you sing Qawwali, you should know the tradition, you respect your master, the style, you follow the tradition and pass it on to the next generation. You make your own unique style, of course, but you have to know the tradition before you can innovate. So similarly, there's several musicians who have had conversations with, who have actually excavated the past in this way, refer to the freedom that going back into the past actually gives in interpreting the present and imagining the future. Sambhaji Bhagat, in an interview to me in 2016, talks about the melding of the concerns of the Lok Shahid tradition and the Ambedkarite music tradition in his repertoire in terms of content, and of a Dalit aesthetic revealed through the form of the songs and the modes of performance. He further explains that this is an alternative aesthetic to the Brahminical one, directly challenging caste hierarchies and calling for equality on the other. So this is the second category of music that I wanted to talk about. And the third and the final type of music I want to discuss today is what I have called the Western idiom, or the Indo-Western format in resistance music. In the last 2 decades, there's been a proliferation of bands and individuals that have used modern Western forms of songwriting, instrumentation, and presentation to point attention to political issues in different parts of the country. Raising questions of caste, state violence, poverty, unemployment, and several other issues, these musicians articulate protest on topical issues through music that often combines Indian languages and musical forms with Western performance formats, idioms, instruments, and singing styles, or employ fully Western forms of music in Indian languages. This Indo-Western idiom has been explored in different ways to address and in fact confront caste questions directly. Dhamma Wings, for example, is a Buddhist rock band that attempts to spread Buddha's and Ambedkar's teachings through music. Drawing its inspiration from something that Ambedkar had once said, "I could address many gatherings and give lectures. It still doesn't have the power that music and the arts does." The band, which sings mostly in the language Marathi, is known for songs such as Jai Bhim Se, Glory Be to Bhim, which is referring to Ambedkar himself, and In the Shade of the Moon. In Punjab, in North India, a whole new subgenre of political music, which calls itself Chamar rap or Chamar pop, and Chamar is the name of a specific Dalit community which has suffered oppression systematically and which continues to experience untouchability and various other forms of caste oppression. So this form of political music has come into existence with scathing assertion of Dalit identity being expressed visually and musically through music videos. Represented by singers like Ruplal Dheer and Ginni Mahi, the songs that they have produced use the images of affluence, masculinity, and vigor to herald the arrival on the musical and political scene of people from the lowest castes. These images draw from those within mainstream Punjabi popular music and imbue them with political messages that challenge caste discrimination by often drawing on topical incidents. Ginni Mahi, a young woman, for example, who came to fame and also considerable commercial success with her song called Danger Chamar, is known to have produced the song after an encounter with her classmate in school, who, after asking what her caste was, is said to have remarked that chamars were dangerous. So she immediately wrote a song called Danger Chamar. And where there's a famous line which says, "Chamars are more dangerous than firearms." So bands and individuals that sing politics are also numerous in the northeastern states of India. And Imphal Talkies and the Howlers Daniel Langtaza and his Mr. India YouTube channel are two examples of these kinds of bands. They're used for, they are well known for singing protest songs about politics, insurgency, human rights issues, and racial attacks in Manipur and across northeastern states of India. Now, there are a lot of racial attacks from the rest of India towards people who come from the northeastern provinces. And in fact, there's a very major anti-racial movement that has built up as a result of some of the really violent incidents that have taken place. And many of these bands focus on questions of race. What is remarkable about the influence of individuals as well as bands that sing politics, employing what I'm referred to as Indo-Western formats, is their direct and most often immediate response to political events and their quick dissemination to large youth populations in different parts of the country, making them effective political communicators to youth, often through commercial platforms, or certainly through using forms that appeal to target audiences very effectively. In recent years, cultural activists from the left and the Ambedkarite movements have been working together in the form of cultural collectives as well. The Rela Collective, the Mara Collective, to impart training and skill development for musicians interested in political music. An important one among these collective initiatives is called the War Beat, a YouTube channel and protest music group, which features professionally produced music and videos and borrows musical ideas from rock and jazz. The War Beat is stated to be an attempt to take movement music from the protest site to the digital space in order to communicate with larger numbers of people and to make their music global, in both the sense of reaching global audiences and sounding global. So to conclude, and then I'm going to play some music after this, the trope of people's music is one that can be used to provide a connecting thread between various kinds of political music that have been created over a period of 8 decades or so in India, and also that one that allows for the link between such pop music and popular entertainment genres that are often commercially successful to be made. I'll stop speaking here and play a couple of videos. So the first video, let me try and play it once again. The first video that I'll play is from the music installation that I was talking about. And the second one is actually from a program that I curate called Waqt Ki Awaaz, which is music of the times, which was devoted to the farmers, the music that came out of the farmers movement. Now, I want to say a little bit about that. That has been one of the most explosive experiences that India has had politically and culturally. It is, I mean, the farmers have been agitating outside Delhi now for almost a year. And about 1 million farmers have been going in and out of the protest sites. And it's been spoken of as the largest protest in history. The government, and this has been against 3 anti-farmer laws that were passed by the Indian Parliament, and the farmers are insisting that they be completely repealed. They're not willing to compromise in terms of small changes in the laws. Now, what happened, and the farmers have been mostly from the provinces of Punjab and Haryana in North India, but have also been joined at various points by farmers from other parts of the country. And what has been phenomenal about this agitation, which continues to this day, has been the involvement of musicians and the Punjabi diaspora is a very large one from all over the world, and musicians have actually received support from the Punjabi and the diaspora all over the world, Punjabi and Haryanvi diaspora, and also the Indian diaspora in general all over the world. And very prominent popular musicians actually jumped into the fray and were producing dozens of songs by the day, for the first 2 or 3 months when the protests began. And what is fascinating is that these are musicians who on YouTube were so popular to begin with. I mean, who had on an average 2 million or 3 million viewers regularly, but the moment they started singing songs supporting the farmers, within days the viewership went up to 8 and 10 million. So that and that's been absolutely phenomenal. So I'll try and play this episode. It's a little long. Maybe we can watch the whole thing. That'll give you a sense of what this movement has been about.
So I think I've sorted it out.
Okay.
We go to share screen.
Yeah.
And then advanced at the top there.
Sorry?
Basic, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then video.
Yeah. But wouldn't I need to choose?
It should give you the choosing function after. Just double click. No, it's not good. Yeah. Then you go to where you are. Yeah.
कोई खंडे तिखे कोई कृपान करूगा कोई खंडे तिखे कोई कृपान करूगा तैनू दिलिए इकट्ठ परेशान करूगा तेरा फायदे नालों ज्यादा नुकसान करूगा पर फसलां दे फैसले किसान करूगा फसलां दे फैसले किसान करूगा कत्तियां दे के चू करोड़ होणगे तेरी धौण दे जो मड़के मरोड़ होणगे 80 वरे दे बाबियां तो लेके थपड़ा 80 वरे दे बाबियां तो लेके थपड़ा तैनू जंग दा ऐलान नौजवान करूगा परेशान करूगा पर फसलां दे फैसले किसान करूगा
So but it came back on YouTube because
हम देखेंगे वो दिन के जिसका वादा है जो लोहे अज़ल में लिखा है हम देखेंगे
Welcome to Waqt Ki Awaaz. In this episode and the next one, we will talk about the music that has been created and performed as part of the ongoing massive struggle against the farm laws which have been enacted in India. What has happened has been quite stupendous. More than 700 songs have been written and performed in the last 2 months alone, and hundreds of others have also been performed from older traditions and existing repertoires. Music and musicians have played a very major role in this struggle. They have posed questions, commented on developments, and also invoked history through their music.
मैं ਸਰਬਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਇਹ ਜੁਗਨੀ ਦੇ ਬੋਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਜੋਸ਼ ਤੇ ਵਲਵਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਰਪਿਤ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਹਾਂ
मेरिया हो जुगनी नोखिए ए साबत सब्र संतोखिए जुगनी पित्तल दियो दिल्ली वाल नू निकल दियो सच की सच सुनाए सी सच की बेला ओ कीर्ति हो किसाना हो कीर्ति हो संगता जुड़िया दूरों आइया नाया के मुड़िया लो सिंगू बार्डर क्या संगता जुड़िया दूरों आइया नाया के मुड़िया सिदक दिला विच मसल हक दी पाल के बैठे लोग ओ कीर्ति हो किसाना हो कीर्ति हो किसाना हो इन्हां लिखी इबारत सड़कां ते सच दी हुण झूठ इमारत वेखो किवें टठदी हुण झूठ इमारत वेखो किवें टठदी विच चोरा है खचर दा पांडा रही लुकाई तोड़ कीर्ति हो
Yeah, so this is just a sample of, the music that came out of the farmers movement. And of course, we've also tried to combine it with the information from the news about as things were unfolding. And this was in the early period. And it was a peak of winter. And then they went into heavy summer as well. And they're still sitting there on the streets. So they take turns, go and do the farming and then come back. And, there's a turnover that happens. So the women go back, work on the farms and then come, and then women stay back and the men go back. And so it's a very, very well organized movement, but the government is not moving, totally unresponsive. So so this was the first one that I wanted to play, and I'll play one more video. So this is a video, as I said in the beginning, this is a video that was created out of archival footage, archival recordings, and also some contemporary and based on contemporary development. So one of the horrific series of incidents that provoked us to do this piece of artistic work was public hangings that took place of people who were of people who were accused of trading in beef or carrying beef, because the cow slaughter was declared as illegal. A cow is supposedly holy within the Hindu faith, and therefore anybody who eats a cow is can be arrested. So there were these horrific killings that took place, and also there were hangings of young Dalit women who were raped and by people who belonged to upper castes, and their bodies were found hanging. So there were a whole series of these kinds of horrific incidents which were reminiscent of the lynchings of African Americans in the 20th century. So what I did was to combine strange fruit, and the images that came up from the lynchings of African Americans in the United States with the image, with what was happening in India just a few years ago. And these things continue to happen. So
Video.
yeah.
Because it's the same kind of format, right? Yeah. Just double click on that.
Yeah, but it says unsupported.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. I don't know why, because it was plain, I guess.
Yeah, there's an MP4 file.
So let me just try the share screen.
Let's try a portion of the screen. See what it does. I have another idea. You can try go to files. Oh, actually, share sound at the bottom and optimize for video clip. And then let's try the normal desktop way. Just double click.
It's not working.
Just play the sound though. The song. You hear the music.
Yeah.
I think why did it minimize?
Well, maybe the music as well. You're sharing screen right now.
Yeah, no, let me just stop share. And my apologies, please be patient. So let me, yeah, this is why it wasn't coming.
Let's try share sound again. I think why it did that is because it wanted your permission from the computer.
Right.
So if you know your password.
There's no password actually.
Oh, really? Yeah, maybe let's try it now.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yeah, it's more, we can see that she's clicking on image.
Can you see that?
Can you see the image now?
Let me just see.
The song is there.
Yeah, but you can hear the song.
You can hear the sound.
Yeah, no, but the images are powerful. I wish I could.
I'm not sure why it doesn't open when it does that, because when the way we played the other video,
Play it
it says
before you share screen. Let's see that.
Okay.
Yeah, or it could be like administrative.
Get it going before share screen.
Okay. So let me. Should we do this?
Good.
No, but then you won't be able to.
Oh, to see you.
Can you get it to play, to open up on your computer?
That's actually.
Southern fields, barren, strange fruit, blood on the leaves, and blood at the roots. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze.
हिंदू और मुस्लिमों की होती है आज होली बहती है एक रंग में दामन भिगोते जाना दिन
खून अपना हो या पराया हो, नस्ल आदम का खून है आखिर। खून अपना हो या पराया हो, नस्ल आदम का खून है आखिर। जंग मशरिक में हो के मगरिब में, जंग मशरिक में हो के मगरिब में, अमन आलम का खून है आखिर।
कौन दुखिया है जो गा रही है, भूखे बच्चों को बहला रही है। लाश जलने की बू आ रही है, जिंदगी है कि चिल्ला रही है। देश में डूबी बाजी फैला अग्नि कौन बुझाए, सूख गए सब तार। जिन हाथों में होती रोले, आज वही कंगाल मुसाफिर, आज वही कंगाल। भूखा है बंगाल, भूखा है बंगाल।
खुल गया इनका
जाने वाले सिपाही से पूछो वो कहाँ जा रहा है। जाने वाले सिपाही से पूछो वो कहाँ जा रहा है। Thank you very much for listening so patiently and being patient with my technological illiteracy.
So Sumi, just I'm saying please post comments and questions.
Yeah.
So you can just invite it.
Yeah.
Awanda has a
Awanda has a powerful question.
Yes. Yeah.
In the video depicting the protest action by the farmers movement, there's a term that the government kept using to try discredit them by saying that they're Khalistanis. What does that mean, and why is that such a why is that term used by the states to try to discredit that movement?
Yeah, because Punjab had a very major movement called the Khalistani movement, where they were demanding a separate state of Pakistan, of Khalistan, and it was something, and you know, it was an insurgent movement, and which was also asking for secession from the Indian state, and it was as part of that. So therefore, you know, anybody who's asking for anything legitimate is immediately dubbed a secessionist and anti-national and wanting to secede from the nation and collaborating with Pakistan and so on. So that's why the reference to the Khalistanis. So basically that they were saying that these are all terrorists, but then there were a million of them. So yeah, and absolutely peaceful, phenomenally peaceful.
So there's a comment from Faisal Kala. He says, you know, he welcomes the music, but as long as we continue with sustainability. But then Lloyd also asked the question. The idea of a usable past is quite interesting in understanding how history becomes important in building solidarity. I'm interested in understanding if music that was excavated from as far back as the 12th century was able to tell alternative histories of the subaltern, or it simply played back the discourses of powerful groups.
Yeah, excellent question. So obviously, you know, whether it's historical or contemporary, it's going to have both. It's going to have, you know, histories of the subaltern and histories of the powerful. So the idea, so in as much as India's history is replete with violence, but it's also replete with the coexistence of multiple communities historically. So and the India that we see today has survived, all said and done, despite conflict or despite you know, very carefully orchestrated violence, you know, between communities and different groups of people, social groups and so on, is something that has survived and is relatively peaceful as a society. So the idea was that, you know, what is there in the past that can also give us some material to talk about the present and to say we are not historically a violent society. So so in that sense, obviously, yes, you know, you could play back the discourses of the powerful groups and castes, certainly, and that happens, and it is in opposition to that this excavation, a more, you know, progressive excavation of the past, to talk about the tolerance that is possible between communities, and not just that, not even about tolerance between communities, but the fact that there were traditions which were adhered to by several different kinds of religious groups. So Sufism, for example, was a philosophy that had followers from all kinds of religious creeds. So what is it that then Sufism could provide as an alternative? So that those were the kinds of questions that were being asked. And at any point, you know, we also have to contend with this, that are we reproducing the discourses of the powerful? So it's a constant debate, and often musicians are told that no, look, what you're actually singing is something that represented violence at some particular point of time. So it keeps the debate alive, which is not to say that any particular repertoire is pure and and is devoid of conflict, but to be able to say that there were debates in the past. It was possible to be an atheist in a highly religious society. India has had very rich traditions of atheist philosophy, for example, within the Hindu tradition. So, so that it was possible to actually have a certain kind of a plurality, and to therefore try and dig out those elements from the past which can actually speak to a progressive future. Yeah.
There's another question from Brett Piper. Thanks so much for this rich talk and for sharing these compelling musical materials, Sumangala. I'm interested in what recovery means as people's musicians and poets have recourse to the past. What kinds of sources do they have access to in retrieving popular memory and articulating them to contemporaries?
Yeah. Yes. So again, excellent question from Brett. Some of it is already available in the sense that, so for example, in the Carnatic music or the Hindustani music repertoire, as it exists, has a very rich corpus which goes back into the past, which is being currently sung. But then people would want to interpret it in a slightly different kind of a way. There have also been, the work of poets which have been sanitized across time. So what people have done is to actually look for sources where the non-sanitized versions or the more provocative versions are available. And often they're available through texts, manuscripts which have come down. They've also, so let me give an example. The medieval poet Kabir was somebody whose work is attributed to the Bhakti movement, or the Bhakti means devotion, and the Bhakti movement came up as alternative devotional movement across different parts of what became India eventually, where it was about a person's devotion to a god, irrespective of what stratum of society that person came from. So it was possible to have an individual's devotion to God that could break through barriers that came from temples or from mosques or from patronage systems or whatever they might have been. Now, Kabir is known to have been a poet who is supposed to have been part of the Bhakti movement. What some people have found who have documented the corpus of Kabir poetry is that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of Kabir musicians all over India. And they're all singing repertoires which they claim are from Kabir. So Kabir, in some sort, did it all come from one person called Kabir? Kabir is said to have existed. I mean, there is evidence that person existed. But did all this music that is from really different parts with different kinds of dialects, were they all written by the same person? Nobody really knows. Was it? But it was also a tradition which has been seen in different parts of the world, where there is a poet and then subsequent scribes who actually, contribute to a corpus by a great poet. Now, so there are Dalit readings of Kabir. There are, the Dalit renderings of Kabir. There are more mainstream renderings of Kabir, and all these. It's only when people actually started through something called the Kabir Project to go out into the countryside to try and find these, that it became apparent that there are hundreds of musicians who are singing Kabir. So that becomes a very rich source, whereas earlier that would not have been known as a source. Now, sometimes people have manuscripts sitting in their houses where a great grandfather would have written something down and kept it somewhere. So those manuscripts have been collected. The manuscripts which have been written on sort of palm leaves and all kinds of natural materials which have come down in tatters. So people have used a variety of these sources. A large part of it is through oral transmission and how people remember it. So yeah, I hope that responds to your question, Brett.
Helen Chappell asks, are these musicians censored stroke, is there freedom of expression in speech and music? Are they in danger?
Yes, several. Many of them are. Many of them are, and at I was talking about the period just before COVID. I mean, that was also the time when the farmers' struggle was beginning to build up in different parts of the country, but they hadn't really started marching to Delhi. But what the struggles all over India against the Citizenship Amendment Act saw huge amounts of mobilization, and particularly in Delhi, there were several areas where thousands of people had gathered and were refusing to move in protest against that. And those actually became these huge carnival sites of resistance where people would come and speak, give speeches. There were posters being made. There were mobile libraries which had come up overnight. There was graffiti all over the place. And that was also a time in which arrests were taking place, left, right, and center. Students were being picked up, activists were being picked up, musicians were also being picked up, sometimes arrested and left on bail. And so very, very large numbers of these musicians. In fact, the Punjab video that I showed you, the first song by this man called Kanwar Garewal was banned. And he was declared, his work was, his music was on the verge of being declared anti-national. And if it gets declared as anti-national, you can be arrested. But what happened was that, and he on an average had 10 or 12 million views every single day those days. So it suddenly disappeared from YouTube. And there was, this material is temporarily unavailable and all of that. But within a few hours, it had reappeared on YouTube. And we don't know who put it back. So he produced another version of the same song saying, this has been banned. And I think he got even more millions of views as a result of that. So yeah, there are very major questions of freedom of expression, and it's not allowed in India.
The other comment is good.
Yeah, I think what was most striking to me was the instruments, and I was trying to think the music beyond just the aesthetics. For instance, when we listen to hip hop, there's a certain kind of beat that you associate with it, or reggae music. So I was really trying to understand that is the difference between the kind of instruments that I used and the kind of messages that sometimes they are intended to portray or to promote. For instance, like in Zimbabwe, there is a certain kind of music that really is attached to the Chimrenga movement, because the idea is really to provoke people to fight as a, to counter that, organized, power, state power is a symbol of resistance. And pretty much that's also been the kind of music that is now also being used by the ruling class up here to keep, maintaining its stranglehold in power, because they say we're the liberation movement of the time. So I really want to understand, the difference between these bits and what I was seeing, the images. For instance, you were telling us this is the Bangladesh song of liberation, but it was different. And it was, so it was quite very interesting.
Yeah. So in these kind of times of, major insurrections, you also have to tend to have these, instruments becoming symbolic. So for example, that big drum that was being played, so that's the kind of drum that is like a war drum. I mean, it's about and or the double flute that was being played. Now the double flute is also a folk instrument, which is very popular in Punjab, and not only in Punjab, in Rajasthan and Gujarat as well. There are these, double flutes that are played. So, yes, obviously they pick up those symbols which would immediately resonate with the population, and people would immediately respond, because they might also come from contexts of mobilization, social mobilization. Otherwise, I mean, they're part of, say, festivals. Festival drums are very often used in these kinds of occasions to mobilize people. And yes, I mean, there are big differences. I mean, India is a huge country, and there are big differences in musical traditions and what people associate with particular kinds of social events. And so all of those are picked up. And what does happen is also, again, it's a very large country and a very varied country, but there's also a lot of cross-pollination that happens. So, there is something called India, however crazy and unstable it might be. Yeah, but there's a lot of similarity in, culturally between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I mean, till 1947, it was all the same place, and then it got partitioned, and then Pakistan got partitioned further into Bangladesh. So there are a lot of similarities as well. The interesting thing about the Bangladeshi song that I played, the Bangladeshi, and that's not the national anthem, but the Bangladeshi national anthem is perhaps the only national anthem in the world, maybe, or I can say this after having listened to a lot of national anthems in different parts of the world. That's the only non-martial sounding national anthem, or non-marching song kind of national anthem. Otherwise, anthems tend to be anthem-esque, right? Which is, they are, I mean, they might not all sound aggressive, but there is a certain, you stand up and salute the flag, a kind of a mood to a national anthem. The Bangladeshi national anthem is very different from that, and that's very consciously done because it came out of a desire for peace. Yeah. So yeah, and so this particular song that I've used in that video is a song which is called 21st February, which is a very important marker in the liberation movement. So yeah, so a lot of the songs from Bangladesh, and interestingly, it's the same person who wrote the national anthem of India and of Bangladesh, Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore. So he wrote both the national anthems. Yeah.
I just want to go back to actually answered parts of this, but going back to the theme of elements of the usable past and repurposing them for the present and the future. And particularly what you talk about right now, 21st February, and also just all those different traditions that have been brought up from across the geographical space of India. When choosing those elements of the usable past, when going out intentionally to pick one of those out, does the difference, particularly when there is a stark difference between, let's say, like a region like Punjabi and a different region, does that difference kind of help to bring unity, or can difference make it a bit more difficult for certain political messages to get across to other parts of the country? So I was very curious, for example, with the 21st February, like because it also has an association with Bangladesh, how does that, how does that affect other regions? Can the difference, for example, in the first song that you spoke about, the one which was banned in both Pakistan and India, the difference kind of made it more, radical, so it brought more people to it. But are there also elements where the difference can kind of, cause a clash?
It could. Well, clashes, I think, would depend on whether the clashes get engineered, honestly. But yes, it's quite possible. So, one of the big questions that musicians were, grappling with in producing a national music of resistance, in local languages, was exactly about how does one part of India communicate with another part of India, and so it became a very active enterprise to produce sounds which would allow for another part of the country, which probably had absolutely no connection with this. And I'm talking about the, the 40s, for example, when you didn't have the internet and these kinds of, the kind of connection between places as existed later on. A lot of thought went into how you could communicate. So often people would try to pick up tunes that would appeal, irrespective of where you come from, tunes that sound good, for example. And so there are innumerable examples where musicians would sing in one language and someone else would pick it up and sing it in their language, and it would change a little bit. But of course, I mean, there would be forms that people just cannot hear or don't like, for example. So it's a constant struggle. And, when I say that music itself becomes a text from which to read debates, this is one of the things that I'm actually referring to. That often it would be in the way in which musicians responded to each other. Somebody would produce a song and someone else would produce another song. And that's where the debate would be. You could actually read a very important aesthetic or political debate from the music itself, because people very rarely wrote these things down. But these have been great experiments for music as well as for imagining social change.
Comments, questions? Anyone in the room? Yes,
Deborah, no, I just really love the cross-pollination of the visual and the graphics and the symbolism and the music and the lyrics. Really spoke to me.
Yeah, well, this is a new, this is new work that I have ventured into over the past few years, working with visual artists and with filmmakers and so on, to make this music speak in a different kind of way. So it's something that I'm learning as well.
It's a new genre, if you like, of resistance.
Yeah.
Art form, the collaboration between the different art forms will then give birth to something that's prized in and of itself.
Yeah.
As a form.
Thank you.
So one thing has one and I have one. Go ahead.
Just to touch on what Deborah was saying right now, and also when you said working with visual artists also takes me to what you were saying yesterday about the ways in which people hear music and the way in which they respond to it. And I think that in this day and age, there's also a visual component to how people process music, particularly because of things such as YouTube, the music video over the past couple of decades. It's really changed the way in which people connect with a song and the message of the song, and that you can have the experience of when I listen to a song and then the experience I have when I watch the video for that song. And I think that there's definitely a very powerful political component to how you can express those kind of sentiments in just one song.
Deborah, focus.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, for me, it's been also a useful way of putting across ideas which, for me, primarily come from music. I mean, it's music which drives it. But then it's also then possible to use visuals in different ways in artistic. I mean, we use, as you've seen, I've used news clippings. Information from news, we use actual footage of events that are there, and also then artistic visuals. Sometimes it's graphics, sometimes it's animations, or for me, music then is beginning to speak in a different kind of way. And it does have a certain kind of an appeal in today's age because of the strongly visual element. Yeah.
So, Samia, I just want to ask about maybe the crossover from sort of counter-hegemonic music and sound to hegemonic. And yes, it's clear that the music coming out of the protests, like the farmers, or even the anti-citizen amendment stuff and so on, is threatening the regime. And of course, there's a coercive element in its response. But when you think about the numbers also in India, it's always like mind-boggling and staggering and so on, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering that if 12 million people are listening, say, to one of the artists in the farmers' protest, what are the kind of 1.48 billion listening to in India? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this crossover, as I said, from counter-hegemonic to hegemonic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise in it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of digital music and sound and other kinds of platforms. And so on. And so I'm just wondering about the efficacy of the counter-hegemonic. I mean, how does it break into that mainstream? Where it's not 12 million, but over a billion.
Yeah. Well, I guess the real threat for the establishment is that it's not 1.48 billion are not listening to a hegemonic, and they fear that this 12 million will become hegemonic, in the sense that, it does become, that's the argument that I've been trying to make, that even though it's small, 12 million is not small. This is something else. What happens?
Small in India.
Well, it's not small even in India. Yeah, it's not small even for India. But but that's of a different order. What happened with the farmers' movement is of a different order. Nobody had expected this to happen. And as you must have, whatever you watched of the videos, they are superbly produced videos, very professionally done. And these singers were, this Kamar Garewal was producing a song every 4 days, literally, fully done, properly done in a studio, and going to the, venue and performing there and running there, so I interviewed him for a performance at some point. It was just phenomenal. So what happened with the farmers' agitation, I think, breaks records of all kinds. And I'm surprised that it's actually, written about so little, even in terms of the music. And the reason why I made that program was to just bring, focus on to just the sheer volume of what was happening. But the rest that I'm talking about are actually small in terms of, numbers who are listening to it. But even then, it becomes so threatening. It becomes so threatening, and it does get into the popular arena somehow or the other. So there are some of these songs, some of the rap songs that have been written, which have found their way into Bollywood, for example. Some of the slogans that were raised in JNU and, by the women's movement, which came to be known as the Azadi slogans. Azadi is, freedom. And people were being arrested, just like that, because they gave the Azadi slogan. Now, the Azadi slogan was used in a Bollywood movie. So what is it that does it, and then the actor, the big star who acted in that movie and singing that song was asked in an interview, but you sang this radical song and all of that, and he said, oh, I'm an actor, tomorrow, and he suddenly sort of skirted it. Obviously, it wouldn't have been very safe for him to, I don't know whether it's safe for me to say all these things as well. But yeah, so the relationship between numbers and hegemony, especially when it comes to music, the establishment really gets terrorized. Because the other thing that's happening in a lot of families, for example, young people are getting influenced by it, whereas the parents are not allowing them to go for the demonstrations and, trying to keep them at home, saying COVID and this and that and all of that, which is all valid, but still, so the young generation is getting influenced. And so even with small numbers, then that becomes powerful.
Any final issues anyone wants to raise? So just on the Dalit movement. So you're seeing this Dalit research, which is so important. And it's throwing up sort of music that's attacking this kind of caste-based edifice and structure of Indian society. It's, historically has had critique and so on, intellectual critique on Ambedkar and so on. So I'm just curious about, where's this going? Because the caste question is a big part of the unresolved Indian question. And it's a political question more than a musical question. How do you see this thing being resolved in India? Is there? It's a hard question, but it's like, do we need Dalit parties to come to power in India, assert sort of a Dalit emancipation, or is it all these small struggles that add up to something? I'm still struggling with it, and I don't know what your thoughts are on Dalit.
Yeah, I can't say I have an answer to this, but yes, there have been Dalit parties which have been in power at various points, and obviously, there are Dalit bourgeois parties, say, which have been in power, but then definitely have managed to push the Dalit question to the forefront, and people having to contend with it, that you cannot ignore it and pretend that this is one marginalized section that you can somehow appease and keep keep them quiet, definitely. But the other thing that has happened politically and is now beginning to get reflected to a small extent in oppositional politics as well is Dalit movements around the work that is done as part of caste hierarchy. So for example, there was a spectacular movement in Gujarat, where the leaders of and there were a bunch of young people who were leading the movement, were beginning to argue that if the cow is your mother, when your mother dies, why do you need us to pick her up? You need the lower castes to pick her up because she's impure. A dead cow is impure within the whole pollution spectrum of India, of the caste hierarchy. So if would you refuse to touch your mother when she's dead? You would venerate her until she's sort of cremated. But when the cow dies, you leave her to die in the sun or wherever it is in the fields, and then it is the Dalit untouchable caste person who has to come and drag it away. And so that was a very poignant and powerful argument. And he said, you keep your cow, give me my land. That was the or you keep your mother, give me my land. Don't make me handle your mother. So that was such a powerful movement that built up. And one of the things that we have alluded to in that video, the second video that you saw, which is the lynchings, there was along with the images of African Americans being hanged like strange fruit, there was also a scroll of some names written, and there was a cell phone pointing at them. That was actually referring to 3 young Muslim men who were lynched, and the lynching was videotaped and went viral. Yeah, showing how the bravado of the people who actually lynched them. So, but the response to these kinds of incidents also has been phenomenal. The response to what is called manual scavenging, which is essentially in the Hindu hierarchy, in a traditional Indian village, shit is picked up physically by people from the lowest castes, and in terribly unsanitary, inhospitable, and really, really terrible conditions. And it continues to this day, that it has to be physically picked up and so on. And they're also the workers who belong to those castes who are the ones who do all the sanitation work, and who go into the drains manually. And there were several incidents where people suffocated because of the acidic fumes that were coming out of the drains. Whereas it's supposed India's supposed to have banned manual scavenging, as it's called, and people are supposed to be not made to go physically into the sewers, but it still happens in different parts of the country. So these are all actually the symbols of highly degraded caste-based work have generated a fabulous opposition. So even the mainstream parties have to take cognizance of it. But I don't know. I don't think in my lifetime, definitely there's going to be an end to caste. No way. But challenges are coming. Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more questions, Sumi, I'm just going to say thank you to you and everyone online. So if you mute and
I'll just come on stream. That was our public lecture by Dr. Damodaran, giving us this amazing topology of subaltern music and resistance in India and part of Asia, and building on this idea of the radical impulse that we've been kind of exposed to and learnt about over the past 2 days. It's clear that there's a lot more here for us to kind of learn from and engage with, and to even cross over from that region of the world to our own continent, our own country, and beyond. I'm hoping that one of our next speakers is going to be on jazz. somebody called Dinga Sikwebu, who I'll be inviting onto this platform. So with those words, a big thank you to Sumangala, Damodaran, a big thank you to the audience that came through to this seminars, that came through to the seminars, both physically and virtually, and of course came to this public lecture tonight. The conversation doesn't end here. We'll be putting the recordings online on the Emancipatory Future Studies webpage. And Sumi, if your talk is written, we will post it on our blog as well. So the conversation, the sharing continues beyond this. Once again, thank you to everybody for your time and participation. Good night. Take care.